He chose the boardroom to erase her. Under fluorescent lights and polished wood, Dr. Greyson Cole stood before the hospital board and called Katherine Hale a chapter I had to leave behind. A few quiet chuckles followed. No one stopped him. No one asked who had paid for that white coat or the years behind it. Katherine did not move. She did not speak. Across the table, a board member opened an email. Then another. Greyson kept talking. He didn't know they had already heard his voice, clear, recorded, undeniable. If you believe silence is not weakness, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I want to see how far truth travels. And if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Katherine Hale did not begin with sacrifice. She arrived there slowly through decisions that seemed temporary at the time. Reasonable, even the kind of choices people make when they believe in something that has not yet proven itself. She was 24 when she met Greyson Cole, working the late shift at a narrow diner tucked between a laundromat and a closed pharmacy in Columbus, Ohio. The diner stayed open past midnight, its fluorescent lights too bright, its coffee too thin, its regulars predictable. Katherine liked it that way. Predictability meant control, and control meant she could plan. Greyson had come in with a textbook under his arm, already wearing the exhaustion of someone who believed sleep was optional. He ordered black coffee, and nothing else, sat in the far booth and read for hours. Katherine noticed the way he annotated his pages, precise, methodical, confident. Not a student guessing his way through material, but someone who assumed he would master it. He returned the next night, and the night after that. It took 3 weeks before he spoke more than a few words. He asked her what she was studying. "I'm not," she said. There was no embarrassment in her tone, just fact. He nodded as if filing the answer away for later. By the end of the month, he had learned her name. By the end of the second, he had begun telling her about medical school applications, about interviews, about the cost. It was never framed as a request, not at first. It was a narrative carefully constructed. Tuition numbers slipped into conversation the way weather did. Rent, books, exam fees. The numbers accumulated quietly, without demand, but not without purpose. Katherine listened. She always listened. When Greyson received his acceptance letter, he brought it to the diner. He unfolded it on the table between them, the paper still crisp, the university seal catching the light. His hands trembled not from fear, but from something closer to certainty finally becoming visible. "I got in," he said. Katherine read the letter once, then again. It was a prestigious program, expensive, demanding, the kind that reshaped a life entirely. "You'll go," she said. It wasn't a question. Greyson smiled, but it was brief. "I don't know if I can afford it." That was the first moment the future shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would have noticed, but Katherine did. She felt it in the pause that followed, in the way the conversation did not end there. She went home that night and opened her notebook. Katherine kept records, not out of mistrust, but out of habit. Her life had never allowed for guessing. Every dollar had a place. Every hour had a purpose. She wrote down her current income, her expenses, her available hours. Then she wrote down a number: tuition. She did not decide that night. Katherine never made decisions quickly. She let them settle, let them reveal their edges. By the end of the week, she had taken a second job, cleaning offices downtown after midnight. By the end of the month, she had taken a third, a night receptionist position at a small motel off the highway where the hours blurred into early morning, and the silence was interrupted only by the sound of trucks passing. 3 jobs, none of them temporary anymore. Greyson did not ask her to do it, but he did not stop her. The arrangement formed gradually, like something unspoken but mutually understood. Katherine began transferring money to him, first small amounts, then larger ones, as tuition deadlines approached. Rent was paid, books were purchased, exam fees were covered. Each transaction was recorded. Date, amount, purpose. She kept receipts when possible, screenshots when not because she anticipated betrayal. That was not how Katherine thought. She documented because it was the only way she knew to ensure that effort did not disappear into assumption. Greyson adapted quickly to the new structure of his life. He moved closer to campus, his schedule filled with lectures, labs, study groups. He spoke often about the future, about residency programs, about specialties, about the kind of doctor he intended to become. "When I make it," he told her once late at night over the phone, "everything will be different." Katherine did not ask what different meant. She understood it in her own way. Different meant stable. It meant rest. It meant that the constant calculation hours against dollars, effort against necessity, would eventually end. She did not need more than that. Their conversations became shorter as time went on, compressed between obligations. Greyson's voice often carried distraction, his attention divided between her and whatever was in front of him, notes, classmates, something else. Katherine adjusted without complaint. She shifted her expectations the same way she shifted her schedule, quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention to the change. But she noticed things. Greyson no longer came to the diner, not even on nights when he said he had time. When she asked about it once, he said it was out of the way, inefficient. Katherine wrote that down. Not in her notebook, but in the part of her mind that tracked patterns. There were other changes, subtle but consistent. He stopped asking about her day. He stopped saying thank you, not abruptly, not in a way that would alarm someone less attentive. The gratitude simply faded, replaced by expectation. As if the support had always been there, as if it required no acknowledgement. Katherine did not confront him. Confrontation required a belief that the other person did not see what they were doing. Katherine understood that Greyson saw everything. He simply chose what mattered. And at that moment, what mattered was forward movement. She did not interrupt that. Instead, she worked. Morning shifts blurred into evening. Evening into night. The motel desk into the cleaning supplies, into the diner counter, into another cycle that repeated without variation. Sleep became something she negotiated with, not something she relied on. Still, she maintained her records. Transfers increased over time. Tuition rose, expenses expanded. Katherine adjusted. There were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when the weight of it surfaced. Standing alone in the supply closet of an office building at 2 a.m. Fluorescent lights humming above her, she would pause. Not long enough to reconsider, just long enough to acknowledge the cost. Then she would continue. Greyson progressed. First year became second. Second became third. His language changed with his advancement. More technical, more precise. He spoke about patients now, about diagnoses, about procedures he had observed. He sounded like someone becoming what he had always intended to be. Katherine listened. She did not insert herself into those stories. She remained outside them the way she remained outside most of his new life. There were no introductions to classmates, no invitations to events, no photographs that included her. At first, Katherine assumed it was timing. Then she stopped assuming. One evening, during a rare dinner they shared, she noticed something else. Greyson checked his phone frequently, not casually, but with intent. Messages appeared, and his expression shifted slightly each time. Not enough to draw attention from someone less observant, but enough for Katherine. She did not ask who was texting him. Instead, she noted the frequency, the timing, the way his tone softened when he read, then sharpened again when he returned to their conversation. Patterns. Katherine trusted patterns more than explanations. When the bill arrived, She paid it without discussion. Greyson did not reach for his wallet. He did not need to. By then, the roles had settled into something fixed, something that no longer required acknowledgement to continue. Katherine returned home that night and updated her records. Another entry, another number. She paused for a moment longer than usual, her pen hovering above the page. Then she wrote the amount down. Carefully, precisely, because even then, long before the boardroom, before the emails, before the silence that would carry more weight than any argument, Katherine Hale understood one thing clearly: nothing she gave would be forgotten. Not by her. By the time Greyson Cole entered his second year of medical school, the structure of their relationship had become efficient. Efficiency, Katherine understood, was often mistaken for stability. Her days were no longer divided by intention, but by necessity. The diner in the early morning, the office buildings at night, the motel desk in the hours in between. Time did not pass in blocks anymore. It folded into itself, compressing until even her exhaustion felt routine. She learned to function inside it. Greyson, on the other hand, was expanding. His world grew larger, with each semester new rotations, new instructors, new expectations. He spoke now in clinical terms, referencing cases' symptoms protocols. His voice carried confidence sharpened by validation. Professors remembered his name. Residents began to trust his judgment. He was becoming visible. Katherine remained where she had always been, just outside that visibility. At first, the distance between them could be explained. Medical school demanded everything. Time was scarce. Priorities shifted. Katherine accepted those explanations because they aligned with the reality she saw. But explanations she knew were only useful when they remained consistent. Greyson's did not. He began canceling plans with short notice, sometimes with reasons, sometimes without. When Katherine called, he answered less frequently. When he did, the conversations felt abbreviated, as though he were measuring how much attention he could afford to give her. "I'll call you back" became a common ending. He rarely did. Katherine did not remind him. Reminders implied expectation. And expectation, she had learned, created imbalance when it was not shared. Instead, she adjusted. She reduced the number of times she reached out. She allowed the silence to stretch, observing what filled it. What filled it was not absence. It was replacement. The shift revealed itself gradually through fragments rather than declarations. A name mentioned once, then again. A study group that seemed to extend beyond academics. A colleague who understood the pressures of his program in ways Katherine could not. "Madeline Foster," he said one evening, almost absent-mindedly. "Her father's on the hospital board. She's been helping organize some of the research placements." Katherine noted the name. Not in her notebook, not yet. But it stayed with her. There was no accusation in her silence, no visible reaction. She did not ask questions that would require him to define the relationship. Katherine understood that definitions offered under pressure rarely reflected truth. They reflected strategy. Instead, she listened. Greyson spoke more frequently about Madeline over the following weeks. Not directly, not with intention, but she appeared in the margins of his stories. "She introduced me to someone in cardiology. We were reviewing cases together. She knows how this system works." Each mention carried a subtle shift in tone. Respect, interest. Something more difficult to categorize, but not difficult to recognize. Katherine did not interrupt. Not. She did not confront him with the pattern. She allowed it to continue because patterns, when uninterrupted, revealed their full shape. Her own life remained unchanged on the surface. She worked. She transferred money. She maintained her records. But internally, something recalibrated. Not an emotional response. Katherine did not move that way. It was an adjustment of attention, a narrowing of focus. She began to observe not just what Greyson said, but what he omitted. He no longer spoke about the future in terms of we. The language had shifted subtly but definitively. When I start my residency, when I get placed, when I move. Each statement was singular. Katherine heard the difference. One night during her shift at the motel, she opened her laptop and reviewed her financial records. The entries spanned years now. Tuition payments, rent transfers, utility bills, groceries, exam fees, emergency expenses, each one documented, each one precise. She scrolled through them slowly, not searching for anything in particular, but allowing the accumulation to present itself. It was not just money. It was time. Years of it converted into hours, worked into sleep, deferred into choices not taken. Katherine closed the laptop without drawing a conclusion. Conclusions she believed should follow evidence, not precede it. The evidence was still forming. Weeks later, the shift became visible in a way that required no interpretation. Katherine arrived early to the hospital one afternoon, carrying a small bag of groceries. Greyson had mentioned he hadn't been eating properly, too busy to cook, relying on vending machines and cafeteria food. She had taken a longer break between shifts to prepare something simple, nothing elaborate, just enough to make the day easier. She did not announce her visit. Katherine rarely did. She entered through the side entrance, moving quietly through corridors she'd only seen once before. The hospital was larger during the day, filled with movement, voices, urgency. It felt like a place that belonged to people with direction. Greyson had direction. Katherine followed the path he had described down a hallway lined with glass offices toward the residence lounge. She saw him before he saw her. Greyson stood near the far end of the corridor, his posture relaxed in a way Katherine had not seen in months. He was speaking with someone, Madeline Foster. Madeline stood close to him, not within professional distance, but something more familiar. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as she spoke, her expression open, confident. Greyson smiled in response, a smile that carried ease rather than effort. It was not the content of their conversation that mattered. Katherine could not hear the words. It was the absence of restraint. Greyson did not look over his shoulder. He did not check his surroundings. He did not anticipate being seen. Because in that space, in that version of his life, Katherine did not exist. She remained where she was, just beyond their line of sight. She did not approach them. There was no reason to. Everything she needed to understand was already visible. After a moment, she turned and walked back the way she had come, the bag still in her hand. She did not feel the need to leave it behind. At the exit, she paused briefly, adjusting her grip, then stepped outside. The air was colder than she expected. Katherine stood there for a moment, not processing, not reacting, simply allowing the moment to settle into the larger pattern she had been observing. Then she reached into her bag and removed her phone. She opened her notes app. Time, location, observation. She recorded it the same way she recorded everything else. Not as an emotional event, as data. When she returned home later that night, she added a new section to her notebook. It was not labeled. Katherine did not assign meaning prematurely. She simply began to collect. Screenshots when they appeared, messages when they surfaced, dates, interactions, absences. Not because she intended to confront Greyson, not because she intended to accuse him, but because Katherine Hale understood something Greyson did not. When a person begins to rewrite the past, the only defense is a record of what actually happened, and she was already writing it. Greyson Cole entered his final year of medical school with a precision that suggested he had already begun to inhabit the life waiting for him. He no longer moved like a student trying to prove himself. He moved like someone expected to succeed. The change was visible in details that required attention to notice. The cut of his coat. The watch he wore, now subtle, expensive, not something he had purchased during his earlier years. The way he spoke in group settings, no longer cautious but measured, controlled. People listened when Greyson spoke. And Greyson had learned how to use that. Katherine observed these changes from a distance, not physically at first. That distance had existed for months. This was something else, an emotional recalibration that allowed her to see him without the framework she had once relied on. She did not interrupt his trajectory. She did not question his decisions. She continued working. The diner remained unchanged. The same customers, the same coffee, the same rhythm of orders called and filled. Katherine moved through it with the efficiency she had developed over years, her mind tracking numbers even as her hands carried plates. The office buildings were quieter at night. Empty hallways, fluorescent lights humming above polished floors. Katherine cleaned methodically, her movements consistent, her thoughts uninterrupted. The motel was the only place where time seemed to pause. Between midnight and dawn, the world narrowed. Conversations were brief, interactions minimal. It was there behind the front desk that Katherine began organizing her records in a more structured way. Not just documenting, categorizing. She divided her notes into sections: financial, communication, timeline. Each entry aligned with the others, forming a structure that was no longer just personal but potentially external. She did not define its purpose yet, but she understood its direction. Greyson's world, meanwhile, expanded further. His rotations brought him into closer proximity with attending physicians, department heads, and administrators. He was no longer just learning. He was being evaluated. And evaluation, Katherine knew, changed behavior. Greyson began attending private gatherings, small events, hosted by senior staff, networking opportunities framed as informal. He mentioned them occasionally, but without detail. "Just something I have to attend," he would say. Katherine did not ask for invitations. She did not expect them. The shift had already clarified her position. Madeline Foster's presence became more defined during this period. She was no longer a name mentioned in passing. She was a constant variable in Greyson's narrative. "Madeline thinks I should consider cardiology. Her father knows someone in the residency program. She understands how placements actually work." Each statement reinforced a pattern. Madeline was not just part of Greyson's environment. She was becoming part of his strategy. Katherine recognized the difference. One evening, during a rare overlap in their schedules, Greyson suggested they meet. The location was not the diner. It was a restaurant Katherine had never been to, modern, minimal, the kind of place where conversation was quiet and deliberate. Greyson arrived late. Not unusually late. Just enough to establish that his time had become more valuable. Katherine was already seated when he approached. She noted the way the host greeted him, familiar, respectful. Not the way one greets a regular, but someone expected. Greyson sat down, adjusting his sleeve slightly before speaking. "Sorry," he said. "Things have been busy." Katherine nodded. She did not ask what had delayed him. He began speaking almost immediately, outlining his current schedule, his upcoming evaluations, the possibilities ahead. His tone carried momentum, as if he were already moving towards something that required explanation. Katherine listened. She always listened. At one point, his phone lit up on the table between them. He glanced at it briefly, then turned it face down. But the action was not neutral. It was deliberate. Katherine registered the timing, the hesitation, the decision to conceal rather than ignore. She did not comment. The conversation continued, but its structure had changed. Greyson spoke about the future again, but not in the same way he once had. "There are opportunities coming up," he said. "Residency placements, research positions, things that require a certain presentation." He paused slightly as if selecting the next word carefully. A certain alignment. Katherine understood the implication before he completed the thought. Alignment did not refer to schedules. It referred to perception. How people see you matters, Greyson continued. Who you're connected to, the circles you're in. Katherine held his gaze, not questioning, not reacting, just allowing him to continue. Madeline's been helpful with that, he added almost as an afterthought. The statement was not framed as significant. But it was. It was the first time he had linked Madeline directly to his advancement, not just as a colleague, but as a factor. Katherine did not respond immediately. She allowed the silence to extend, giving Greyson space to clarify if he intended to. He did not. Instead, he reached for his glass, taking a sip before shifting the conversation to something else. The moment passed. But Katherine had already recorded it. Not in writing, in structure. The evening ended without conflict. The bill arrived. Katherine reached for it. Greyson did not stop her. The transaction completed the way it always had. Predictable, consistent, but no longer neutral. When Katherine returned home, she opened her notebook. She did not write about the dinner itself. She wrote about the pattern it confirmed. Greyson was not distancing himself randomly. He was repositioning. And repositioning required separation. Not necessarily immediate, but inevitable. Katherine added a new section to her records that night. Not labeled, but distinct. It contained observations that were no longer just descriptive, but relational. How Greyson's behavior shifted in different environments. How his language adapted, depending on his audience. How his acknowledgement of her presence decreased in proportion to his proximity to others. It was not emotional analysis. It was behavioral mapping. Weeks later, the pattern solidified further. Greyson began appearing in places Katherine could not access. Photographs surfaced online, group images from hospital events, networking gatherings, academic presentations. Greyson stood among peers, among superiors, among individuals whose names carried weight within the institution. Madeline was often beside him, not always directly next to him, but close enough to establish association. Katherine did not search for these images. They appeared, shared by others, tagged, circulated. Visibility created its own record. Katherine added timestamps, dates, contexts. She did not interpret. She documented. One night during her shift at the motel, she received a message from Greyson. Short, direct. Won't be able to talk much this week. Big evaluations coming up. Katherine read it once, then again. She did not respond immediately. When she did, her reply was equally brief. Understood. No questions, no requests, no adjustments. Greyson did not follow up. The silence that followed was not new. But it was no longer neutral. It was structured, intentional. Katherine closed her phone and returned to her records. The sections had grown. Financial, communication, timeline, behavioral. Each one aligned with the others, forming a network of information that no longer relied on memory. Memory, Katherine knew, could be challenged. Records could not. By the end of that week, she had completed a full chronological outline of their relationship, not as a story, but as a sequence of verifiable events. Dates, amounts, statements, absences. It was no longer about understanding what had changed. That had already been established. It was about preserving what had existed. Because Katherine Hale understood something Greyson Cole had not yet considered, reinvention required erasure. And erasure only worked when no one had kept the original. She had. By the time the first message appeared on Katherine Hale's screen, it did not feel like a discovery. It felt like confirmation. Greyson hadn't sent it to her. That would have required a level of care he no longer extended. It came through a secondary channel, an accidental notification preview when his account briefly synced to a shared device he had once used and never fully disconnected. Katherine did not react immediately. She had learned to give information space before assigning it meaning. The message was simple. A name at the top, Madeline. A line beneath it. Dinner was easier without complications. We should keep things that way. Katherine read it once. Then again, she did not scroll further. Not yet. Instead, she set the phone down and returned to what she had been doing, organizing receipts at the motel desk, aligning them by date, cross-referencing them with her bank statements. The motion of her hands remained steady, the rhythm unchanged. Only after she had completed the task did she return to the message. This time, she opened the full thread. The conversation extended back weeks, not continuous, not excessive, but consistent enough to establish a pattern. Madeline's tone was confident, controlled, occasionally directive. Greyson's responses were measured, occasionally delayed, but aligned. There was no hesitation in his language, no uncertainty about the nature of the connection. There were references to meetings, to shared plans, to decisions that excluded other variables. Katherine did not search for emotional content. She searched for structure, dates, times, frequency. She noted how the messages increased during periods when Greyson had been less available to her. How the tone shifted depending on context, professional during the day, more informal at night. It was not hidden. It was simply not meant for her. Katherine began taking screenshots. Each one captured in full, including timestamps, sender details, and surrounding context. She did not crop. She did not edit. She preserved the information exactly as it appeared. Then she transferred the files to her laptop, backed them up, labeled them. Not with names, with dates. The organization mattered, not for her, for later. When she finished, she closed the laptop and sat still for a moment. Not processing, not reacting, just allowing the data to settle into the larger framework she had been building. There was no question now about the direction Greyson had chosen. But direction alone was not enough. Katherine needed clarity, not about his intentions, about his actions. Over the following weeks, she continued her routine without alteration. She worked. She transferred money. She responded when necessary. She did not confront him. Greyson did not suspect a change. From his perspective, nothing had shifted. Katherine's silence had always been consistent, her support uninterrupted, her presence predictable in its absence. That predictability allowed him to operate without adjustment. It allowed him to continue, which was what Katherine needed. The more he continued, the more complete the record became. Additional messages appeared, not through accident this time, through access. Greyson had grown less cautious. Passwords reused, devices left open, accounts synced across platforms without awareness of where they remained active. Katherine did not exploit this carelessly. She accessed only what was necessary, documented only what was relevant. Messages that established continuity. Messages that revealed intent. There were no explicit declarations, no single statement that defined the relationship. But there did not need to be. The pattern was sufficient. Dinner reservations, private meetings, references to keeping things simple, mentions of Katherine not by name, but by implication. Once everything settles, after placements are confirmed, we don't need unnecessary complications. Katherine saved each instance, not as evidence of betrayal, as evidence of strategy. Greyson was not acting impulsively. He was planning. And planning required sequence. Katherine mapped that sequence. She aligned the messages with her financial records. Dates when large transfers had been made. Dates when communication from Greyson had decreased. Dates when his presence shifted elsewhere. The overlap was consistent. Support increased. Acknowledgement decreased. Association with Madeline intensified. It was not coincidence. It was correlation. One evening, Katherine reviewed her bank statements in detail. Not just the amounts, the context. She identified every major expense related to Greyson's education. Tuition payments, housing, books, exam fees, supplemental courses, emergency transfers. Each one linked to a corresponding period in his academic progression. Each one documented. Then she identified the language Greyson had used during those times, messages where he referenced the support, where he acknowledged dependence, where he framed the contributions as temporary, as something that would be addressed later. Katherine highlighted those messages, separated them, created a new file, not labeled, but distinct. This was no longer just a record. It was a structure of proof, not yet formalized, but approaching it. Greyson, meanwhile, continued forward without interruption. His schedule intensified as final evaluations approached. Residency applications required precision presentation alignment with the right networks. Madeline's role became more visible, not publicly, but within the spaces that mattered. She introduced him to individuals Katherine could not name, facilitated connections, created opportunities. Greyson adapted to that environment quickly. He understood its rules. He understood what needed to be emphasized, what needed to be omitted. Katherine's existence fell into the latter category. Not denied, simply excluded. One night, Greyson called. Unexpected. Katherine answered on the second ring. "I've been busy," he said without preamble. "I know," she replied. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just unfilled. "I might not be around much the next few weeks," he continued. "Things are shifting." Katherine listened. She did not ask what that meant. Greyson continued anyway. "There are expectations now. People are watching. I have to be careful about how things look." The statement carried more weight than he intended. Katherine recognized it. "How things look," she repeated quietly. "Yeah," he said. "You understand." Katherine did, more than he realized. "I do," she said. Greyson seemed satisfied with that. The conversation ended shortly after. No conflict, no resolution, just continuation. Katherine placed the phone down and opened her notebook. She added a new entry. Not a financial record, not a message, a statement. Exact wording, context, date, time. Because language she knew often revealed more than actions. And Greyson had just defined his position clearly. It was not about what had happened. It was about how it would be perceived. Katherine closed the notebook and sat still for a moment. Then she reached for her laptop, opened the files, reviewed the structure she had built. It was complete enough now to stand on its own. Financial records aligned with communication. Communication aligned with behavior. Behavior aligned with outcome. There were no gaps, no inconsistencies, no reliance on interpretation, only documented sequence. Katherine did not rush the next step. She allowed the structure to exist for several days without alteration, revisiting it, testing it, ensuring that it held. It did. When she finally moved, it was not sudden. It was deliberate. She searched for legal counsel, not broadly, specifically. Someone experienced in financial disputes, in cases where informal arrangements required formal recognition. She found a name. Ethan Caldwell. His practice focused on contractual ambiguity, on situations where agreements existed without being explicitly defined. Katherine scheduled a consultation, not immediately. At a time that fit within her existing structure, because even now she did not disrupt her routine. She maintained it. until the moment it no longer served its purpose. And that moment was approaching. Greyson Cole believed he was moving forward, that his past could be repositioned, simplified, left behind without consequence. Katherine Hale did not interrupt that belief, because she understood something he did not. Movement does not erase origin, and when origin is documented, it does not disappear. It waits. Katherine Hale did not change her routine after scheduling the consultation with Ethan Caldwell. Change, she believed, should never precede certainty. She continued working the same hours, moving between the diner, the office buildings, and the motel with the same measured efficiency. Her records remained up to date. Her communication with Greyson remained minimal but consistent. Nothing in her outward behavior suggested that a shift had already begun. That was intentional. Greyson Cole, meanwhile, had entered a phase where visibility mattered more than effort. His rotations placed him in departments where evaluation extended beyond clinical performance. Reputation began to form in conversations that occurred outside patient rooms, in offices, in meetings, and informal gatherings where decisions were shaped before they were announced. Greyson adapted to that environment with precision. He knew when to speak and when to listen. He understood how to present himself in ways that aligned with expectations. His confidence, once internal, had become performative. People began to recognize him, not as a student, as a candidate. Katherine observed this indirectly. Through updates he chose to share. Through the absence of details he omitted. Through the patterns she had already mapped. Madeline Foster's role during this period became more defined not through declaration, but through access. Greyson referenced opportunities that did not originate from formal channels. "Someone put in a word for me," he said once. "Things are opening up." Katherine did not ask who that someone was. She already knew. Madeline's influence operated within a space Katherine could not enter, but could still trace. The connections, the introductions, the timing, they aligned too consistently to be coincidental. Greyson was no longer just progressing. He was being positioned. One afternoon, between her diner shift and her night work at the office buildings, Katherine found herself near the hospital again. This time, she did not carry anything with her. No groceries, no reason to enter. She remained outside across the street, where the flow of people moving in and out created a constant, shifting background. She stood there for several minutes, not watching for a specific moment, but allowing the environment to present itself. Greyson emerged from the main entrance. Not alone. Madeline walked beside him, their pace aligned, their conversation uninterrupted. There was no hesitation in their proximity. No attempt to create distance in a public space. They moved as if they belonged to the same structure, which in many ways they did. Greyson's posture in that moment was different from anything Katherine had seen before. It was not just confidence. It was alignment. With the environment, with the expectations, with the person beside him. Madeline spoke her expression, composed her gestures, controlled. Greyson listened, then responded, his tone measured. They paused briefly near the entrance. Madeline adjusted something on his coat, small, precise, familiar. Greyson did not pull away. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it contained more information than any message Katherine had documented. There was no concealment, no awareness of being observed, because in that version of Greyson's life, Katherine did not exist. Not in that space, not in that narrative. Katherine turned before they could see her, not out of avoidance. There was simply nothing more to observe. She walked away, her pace steady, her attention already shifting back to the structure she had built. That evening, during her shift at the motel, Katherine prepared for her meeting with Ethan Caldwell. She did not bring everything, only what was necessary. A selection of financial records, a limited set of communications, the audio files she had identified as most relevant. She organized them into a folder, chronological, labeled by date, accessible, not overwhelming. Clarity, she knew, was more effective than volume. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. Katherine arrived early. Ethan Caldwell's office was located in a mid-rise building downtown, professional, understated, designed for function rather than impression. The waiting area was quiet, the receptionist efficient. Katherine checked in and sat down, her posture composed, her folder resting on her lap. She did not review the contents again. She did not need to. Ethan Caldwell called her in exactly at the scheduled time. He was in his early 40s, his demeanor neutral, his movements precise. He did not waste time with unnecessary formalities. "Katherine Hale," he confirmed. "Yes." He gestured toward a chair. "Tell me what you have." Katherine did not begin with explanation. She began with documentation. She placed the folder on his desk and opened it, turning it so he could see the contents clearly. "These are financial records," she said. "Transfers made over the past 4 years. Tuition, rent, living expenses." Ethan scanned the first page, then the next. "Relationship?" he asked. "Personal," Katherine replied. "Not formalized." "Any written agreements?" Katherine paused briefly. "Not in the traditional sense," she said. "But there are communications that reference repayment." Ethan nodded. "Show me." Katherine selected a set of printed messages, highlighted sections, dates clearly marked. Ethan read them without interruption. "Audio?" he asked. Katherine placed a small device on the desk. "Relevant segment is marked," she said. Ethan connected it to his computer and listened. The recording was clear. Greyson's voice was unmistakable. He spoke about dependence, about support, about future repayment. There was no ambiguity in the tone. Ethan stopped the recording and leaned back slightly. "How recent is this?" he asked. "Within the past year," Katherine said. Ethan nodded again, this time slower. "Do you have a full timeline?" "Yes." Katherine handed him another document. A structured sequence of events. Financial contributions aligned with academic progression. Communication patterns aligned with behavioral changes. It was not narrative. It was evidence. Ethan reviewed it in silence. Several minutes passed. Katherine did not speak. When Ethan finally looked up, his expression had shifted, not dramatically, but enough to indicate recognition. "This isn't informal support," he said. "This is structured contribution with implied expectation." Katherine said nothing. Ethan continued. "Legally, this falls into a category we can work with. Unjust enrichment, potentially financial exploitation, depending on how it's framed." He closed the folder. "What outcome are you looking for?" Katherine considered the question. "Not for long." "Accuracy," she said. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, as if evaluating whether that answer was sufficient. "Not compensation?" he asked. "If it aligns with the structure," Katherine replied, "but not as the primary objective." Ethan nodded. "That simplifies some aspects," he said, "complicates others." Katherine understood. He leaned forward slightly. "There's another dimension here," he added. "He's in a regulated profession. Ethical standards apply. If this intersects with misrepresentation, especially if he's presenting himself in a way that excludes material support, it could extend beyond civil." Katherine did not react. But she registered the implication: institutional involvement. Ethan continued. "We can proceed in stages," he said. "Formal demand, documentation submission, if necessary escalation." Katherine closed the folder. "Proceed," she said. Ethan nodded. "I'll prepare the initial documents," he said. "We'll need everything organized digitally. Clean, verifiable." "It already is," Katherine replied. Ethan allowed a brief pause. Then, for the first time, a subtle shift in his expression. "Good," he said. The meeting ended without further discussion. Katherine left the office the same way she had entered, quietly, without drawing attention. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Unaware, unchanged. But the structure Katherine had built was no longer contained. It had entered a system. And systems, she knew, operated differently than individuals. They did not rely on memory. They relied on record. Greyson Cole continued forward, unaware that the narrative he had begun to construct, one where the past could be minimized, repositioned, eventually erased, was already being reviewed in a context where omission carried consequence. Katherine Hale did not need to interrupt him. She only needed to let the record speak. And now it would. The invitation did not have Katherine Hale's name on it. It was not meant to. The medical school's graduation ceremony was held in a large auditorium on the edge of campus, a space designed to accommodate families, faculty, and the quiet expectations that came with both. Rows of chairs filled early. Conversations overlapped in low, controlled tones. Cameras were adjusted, programs unfolded. Katherine arrived before most. Not because she had been asked to, because she preferred to observe before being observed. She wore nothing that would draw attention. A simple dress, neutral tones, no accessories beyond what was necessary. She chose a seat near the back where the entire stage remained visible, but her presence did not require acknowledgement. From that distance, she could see everything clearly. Greyson Cole stood among the graduating class, his posture aligned with the others, his expression composed. The gown fit him well. The white coat beneath it, partially visible, marked a transition he had been preparing for years. He looked like someone who belonged there. Katherine did not question that. He had worked for it. That was not in dispute. What mattered was what had been required to reach that point. The ceremony began without delay. Speeches followed a predictable structure. Faculty members spoke about dedication, resilience, the responsibility of the profession. Names were called. Applause moved in waves, rising and falling as each graduate crossed the stage. Katherine listened, not to the words, to the tone, to the way certain names carried more recognition than others, to the way certain families responded with louder applause with visible pride. Greyson's name was among those that drew attention. When it was called, the response from the front rows was immediate. Madeline Foster stood. Her reaction was not restrained. She clapped with intention, her posture upright, her expression open. Beside her, a man Katherine recognized from Greyson's earlier mentions, Madeline's father, a member of the hospital board, remained seated, but nodded slightly, his approval measured. Greyson crossed the stage with controlled confidence. He shook hands with the dean, accepted his diploma, paused briefly for the camera. The moment was recorded. Then he moved on. From her seat, Katherine noted the sequence, not the surface, the structure beneath it. Recognition, association, visibility. After the formal portion concluded, the ceremony transitioned into something less structured. Graduates moved into the aisles, reconnecting with those who had come to witness them. Conversations expanded. Laughter surfaced. Photographs were taken in clusters, each one capturing a version of success that could be shared later. Katherine remained seated. She did not move immediately. Movement, she knew, attracted attention. She allowed the crowd to shift first, to create openings, to define its own patterns before she entered it. When she stood, it was with the same quiet precision she applied to everything else. She moved along the outer edge of the auditorium, avoiding the central clusters where recognition was most concentrated. Greyson was easy to locate. He stood near the front, surrounded by a small group that included Madeline, her father, and several individuals Katherine did not know by name, but recognized by context: faculty, administrators, people whose presence signaled influence. Greyson spoke with ease. His gestures were controlled, His tone measured his attention distributed evenly among those around him. He did not appear distracted. He did not appear divided. He appeared aligned. Katherine did not approach immediately. She observed. She noted how he positioned himself within the group, how he responded when addressed, how he acknowledged Madeline's presence. Not overtly, not in a way that would draw attention, but consistently. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no indication that another part of his life existed outside this one. After several minutes, Katherine stepped forward. Not directly into the group, close enough to be seen. Greyson noticed her almost immediately. The shift in his expression was subtle. Not shock, not recognition in the way one might expect. It was adjustment, a recalibration of context. He excused himself from the group with a brief statement, something about needing a moment, and walked toward her. "Katherine," he said. Her name sounded different in that space. Less certain, more controlled. "Greyson," she replied. They stood facing each other, the noise of the surrounding crowd, creating a buffer that allowed their conversation to exist, without being overheard, but not without being observed. "You came," he said. It was not a question. "I did," Katherine answered. A pause followed. Greyson glanced briefly over his shoulder, as if confirming that his absence from the group would not be questioned immediately. "This isn't really the best time," he said. Katherine nodded. "I understand." She did not step closer. She did not attempt to extend the conversation. "I won't take long," she added. Greyson waited. Katherine met his gaze. "Congratulations," she said. The word was delivered without hesitation, without qualification. It was accurate. Greyson seemed momentarily uncertain how to respond. "Thank you," he said. Another pause. Not uncomfortable, but unfilled. Katherine did not introduce any new topic. She did not reference the past. She did not mention the records, the messages, the structures she had built. That was not the purpose of this moment. Greyson shifted slightly, his posture indicating a need to return. "I have people waiting," he said. Katherine followed his glance briefly. Madeline remained where he had left her, her attention directed toward the group, but her awareness of Greyson's absence was evident in the way she occasionally looked toward the space he had vacated. "I see," Katherine said. She did not move to leave. Not yet. There was one more observation to complete. Greyson hesitated. It was brief, but it was there, as if he expected something else. A question, a reaction, a request. Katherine offered none of those. Instead, she stepped back slightly, creating space. That's all she said. Greyson nodded. The moment resolved. He turned and walked back toward the group without looking over his shoulder. Katherine watched him re-enter that space. Watched the way he was received. The way the conversation resumed without disruption. The way Madeline's posture adjusted subtly as he returned, closing the space that had briefly existed. The alignment restored itself immediately, as if it had never been interrupted. Katherine remained where she was for a few seconds longer. Not reflecting, not reconsidering, just confirming. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Outside, the air carried the residual warmth of the afternoon. Families gathered on the steps, taking photographs marking the occasion in ways that would be remembered later. Katherine moved past them without slowing. She reached her car, placed her hand on the door, then paused briefly, not because of what had happened, because of what had not. There had been no denial, no confrontation, no acknowledgement beyond the surface. Greyson had not introduced her. He had not explained her presence. He had not attempted to integrate her into that space, which meant one thing. The separation was no longer implied. It was established. Katherine opened the car door and sat inside. She did not start the engine immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and removed her notebook. She opened it to a new page. Date, time, event. She wrote graduation ceremony, no acknowledgement, no integration. Separate structures confirmed. She closed the notebook and placed it back in her bag. Then she started the car. Greyson Cole would remember this day as a milestone, a transition into the next phase of his life. Katherine Hale would remember it as something else, not an ending, a confirmation. The record was complete. Now it only needed to be presented. Greyson Cole's first week as a resident did not begin with celebration. It began with structure, schedules posted before dawn, rotations assigned without negotiation, expectations outlined in language that did not allow for interpretation. The hospital no longer functioned as a place of learning. It functioned as a system. Greyson adapted quickly. He understood systems. He understood where authority resided, how decisions were filtered, how visibility translated into opportunity. His movements became more deliberate, his interactions more calculated. He spoke less, listened more, and when he did speak, it was with precision. He was no longer trying to be noticed. He was ensuring he was noticed correctly. Katherine Hale observed this transition without proximity, not from within the hospital, from the patterns that extended beyond it. His availability decreased further. Messages became infrequent, then intermittent, then nearly absent. When he did respond, the content was minimal. Busy, long shift, we'll call later. He rarely did. Katherine did not adjust her behavior to compensate. She did not increase her attempts to reach him. She allowed the silence to expand. Silence, she knew, revealed structure more clearly than conversation. During this period, Greyson made his position explicit, not through action, through language. The meeting was not planned. It occurred because Katherine made herself available at a time when he could not avoid it. She chose a location that removed variables, neutral, public. A small cafe near the hospital, not associated with his new environment, but close enough that attendance required minimal effort. She sent a single message. We should talk. Today. No explanation, no context. Greyson responded after several hours. Make it quick. Katherine arrived first. She selected a table near the window where visibility was balanced, open enough to observe, contained enough to avoid intrusion. She ordered nothing. Greyson arrived 10 minutes late, not significantly, but deliberately. He approached the table without hesitation, his posture aligned with the version of himself he had constructed within the hospital. Controlled, efficient. He did not sit immediately. What is this about, he asked. Katherine looked at him, not at his posture, not at the coat he wore, at the structure beneath it. I wanted to understand your position, she said. Greyson exhaled slightly as if the question confirmed something he had already anticipated. There's not much to understand, he replied. Things have changed. Katherine nodded. I've observed that. Greyson pulled out the chair and sat down, but he did not relax into it. His posture remained upright, prepared to leave. This isn't going to work anymore, he said. The statement was direct, unqualified. Katherine did not interrupt. Greyson continued. Our lives are moving in different directions. My career requires a certain level of focus, a certain environment. He paused briefly. Aspects of my past don't align with that. Katherine allowed the words to settle. Not their meaning, their structure. How you define alignment, she said, matters. Greyson's expression tightened slightly. This isn't about definitions, he replied. It's about reality. Katherine considered that. Then she asked a single question. What part of this was not real? Greyson did not answer immediately. His gaze shifted briefly toward the window, then back to her. That's not what I'm saying, he said. I'm saying that it doesn't fit anymore. Katherine nodded once. A small movement, measured. And the support, she asked. Greyson's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What about it? He said. Katherine did not raise her voice, did not alter her tone. Do you consider it part of what no longer fits? She asked. Greyson leaned back slightly, creating distance. I've always appreciated what you did, he said. But it wasn't an agreement. It was something you chose. The phrasing was careful, constructed. Katherine recognized that. And your statements, she asked. Greyson's gaze sharpened. What statements? Katherine did not reach for her phone, did not present evidence. Not yet. About repayment, she said. About dependence. Greyson's posture shifted again, not outwardly defensive, but internally adjusted. That was different, he said. Different context, different situation. Katherine held his gaze. And now Greyson did not hesitate this time. Now I have to be careful about how things are perceived, he said. My position, my associations, they matter. Katherine understood. Not the explanation, the admission. How things are perceived, she repeated. Yes, Greyson said. It's not personal. Katherine allowed a brief pause. Then she asked, Is that how you would describe it in a formal setting? Greyson frowned slightly. What do you mean? Katherine did not elaborate. She simply observed. Greyson exhaled a trace of impatience entering his tone. Look, I don't have time for this, he said. We've both moved on. That's the reality. Katherine did not argue, did not contradict. She accepted the statement. As data. Understood, she said. Greyson seemed to expect more, a reaction, a response. When none came, he shifted again. Is that it? He asked. Katherine nodded. That's it. Greyson stood. He did not wait for further confirmation. He did not offer closure. He simply turned and walked away. Katherine remained seated. She did not watch him leave. She did not need to. The conversation had already provided everything she required. After several minutes, she stood and exited the cafe. Outside, the movement of the city continued uninterrupted. Katherine walked to her car, her pace steady, her attention already transitioning to the next step. Inside, she did not start the engine immediately. Instead, she reached for her phone, opened her notes, recorded the conversation, exact wording, sequence, tone. Then she opened a separate file, one she had prepared but not yet completed. She added the final elements, Greyson's statements from the meeting, aligned with previous messages, aligned with financial records, aligned with the audio. The structure was now complete, not just in content, in consistency. There were no contradictions, no gaps, no reliance on interpretation, only documented progression. Katherine closed the file and transferred it to her laptop, then to a secondary backup, then to a secure folder prepared for external review. She did not revisit the content. She did not question it. The work of observation was finished. Now it moved into a different phase. That evening, she received a message from Ethan Caldwell. Documents reviewed. Ready to proceed. Katherine read it once, then replied, Proceed. Greyson Cole believed the conversation at the cafe had resolved something. That clarity had been established. That separation had been defined on his terms. He did not consider that clarity worked in both directions. That definition, once spoken, did not belong solely to the person who initiated it. Katherine Hale did not need to respond to his version of events. She only needed to present the full record. And now it would move beyond her, into a space where perception would be tested against documentation, where statements would be measured against evidence, where alignment would no longer be defined by intention, but by truth. Katherine Hale did not experience urgency after telling Ethan Caldwell to proceed. Urgency implied uncertainty. What she had built no longer required acceleration. It required accuracy sequencing and adherence to process. She understood that once documentation entered a formal system, control shifted. Not entirely, but enough that impatience could compromise clarity. So, she maintained her routine. The diner, the office buildings, the motel. Each shift continued as it had before. Her movements, unchanged, her interactions minimal. To anyone observing her, nothing suggested that a legal process had begun. That was intentional. Greyson Cole, meanwhile, moved deeper into his residency. His schedule expanded. His responsibilities increased. His exposure within the hospital intensified. He was no longer just being evaluated. He was contributing, participating in decisions, managing cases under supervision, navigating the internal hierarchy with growing confidence. His presence in institutional spaces solidified. Katherine followed this progression through indirect channels, public announcements, internal newsletters, mentions and conversations that reached her through distance rather than proximity. Greyson was becoming established, which meant that what came next would intersect with more than just him. Ethan Caldwell's first step was not confrontation. It was formalization. The demand letter was prepared within 3 days, structured, precise, not emotional, not accusatory. It outlined the financial contributions Katherine had made over the course of Greyson's education, supported by documentation. It referenced communications in which Greyson acknowledged those contributions and indicated an expectation of repayment. It did not assign motive. It did not speculate. It presented facts. Katherine reviewed the document once, line by line, not for content, she already knew that, for structure, clarity, consistency with the records she had built. There were no discrepancies. Send it, she said. Ethan did. The letter was delivered to Greyson's registered address and to the hospital's administrative office, where correspondence related to staff was routinely processed. Katherine did not wait for a response. Waiting suggested dependency on the outcome. She continued her routine. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th day, Greyson called. Katherine answered. "What is this?" he asked. No greeting, no context, just the question. Katherine recognized the shift in his tone immediately. Less controlled, more reactive. A formal summary, she said, of what Greyson pressed. Of documented financial contributions, Katherine replied. There was a brief silence. Not empty, measured. "You're serious," he said. Katherine did not respond to the question. "I've provided a structured record," she said. "It's been submitted for review." Greyson exhaled sharply. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can handle this privately." Katherine understood the distinction he was making. Private meant contained, controlled, unrecorded. That option is no longer efficient, she said. Greyson's tone shifted again. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. There was no agreement. You chose to help. Katherine had expected this. She had already aligned his previous statements against this position. "There are communications that reference expectation," she said. "That was different," Greyson replied quickly. "That was..." He stopped. Katherine waited. He did not complete the sentence. The gap was noted. "You're taking things out of context," he continued. "This isn't how this works." Katherine did not argue. She did not need to. "The context is documented," she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Why are you doing this?" Greyson asked. The question carried a different weight. Not defensive, not strategic, uncertain. Katherine considered it briefly, then answered. "For accuracy," she said. Greyson did not respond immediately. When he did, his tone had shifted again. Lower, more controlled. "This could affect my position," he said. Katherine understood that. "Yes," she replied. "You're sending this to the hospital?" he asked. "It has been submitted to relevant parties," Katherine said. Greyson's breathing changed slightly. Subtle, but audible. "You don't need to involve them," he said. "This is between us." Katherine recognized the attempt to redefine scope. "To them it may not be," she said. Greyson did not respond. The silence extended. Then he spoke again. "What do you want?" he asked. The question was direct, transactional. Katherine had anticipated it. "Acknowledgement," she said, and Greyson pressed. "Resolution aligned with documented contributions," she replied. Greyson exhaled again. "Longer this time. We can figure something out," he said. "But this isn't the way to do it." Katherine did not adjust her position. "This is the documented way," she said. Greyson's tone hardened slightly. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." Katherine understood his perspective. From his position, scale was risk. From hers, scale was accuracy. "It already is," she said. The conversation paused again. Greyson did not attempt to end it immediately, which in itself was information. He was recalculating, adjusting, looking for a path that restored control. "You should have talked to me first," he said. Katherine considered that, then responded. "I did." The statement referred not to a single conversation, but to the accumulation of them. Oh. Greyson did not challenge it, because he understood the implication. The call ended without resolution. No agreement, no escalation, just recognition. Greyson now understood that the situation had moved beyond informal boundaries, that it existed within a system that operated differently than personal negotiation. Katherine placed her phone down and returned to her records. She added the conversation to the file. Exact wording, sequence, tone, aligned with previous statements, aligned with documented behavior. The structure remained consistent. Ethan Caldwell contacted her later that evening. "He's responded?" he asked. "Yes," Katherine said. "Position denial of formal agreement. Concern about institutional involvement." Ethan paused briefly. "That's expected," he said. "Next step is escalation." Katherine listened. "We'll submit the full documentation," Ethan continued. "Not just the summary. Financial records, communications, audio." Katherine understood. "That includes the hospital's ethics committee," he added. Given his position, Katherine did not hesitate. "Proceed." Ethan paused again. "This will become visible," he said. "Not publicly, but internally. It will be reviewed." Katherine understood the implication. Visibility within the system Greyson now depended on. "That is the structure," she said. Ethan acknowledged it. "I'll finalize the submission." The call ended. Katherine sat in the quiet of her apartment, the city's distant noise filtering through the window. She did not revisit the documents. She did not anticipate the outcome. Anticipation, she knew, introduced variables she could not control. Instead, she focused on what had already been established. The record, complete, consistent, verified. Greyson Cole believed the situation could still be managed, adjusted, contained within parameters he understood. Katherine Hale had already moved it beyond those parameters, into a system where statements would be compared against evidence, where patterns would be evaluated, where omission would not function as erasure. The submission was scheduled for the following morning. Once sent, it would no longer belong solely to her. It would belong to process. And process, unlike individuals, did not forget. Katherine Hale did not attend the submission. There was no reason for her to be present when the documentation was delivered to the hospital's ethics office. Ethan Caldwell handled that process, ensuring that every file met the standards required for institutional review, complete, verifiable, and properly indexed. Katherine understood that once information entered a system like this, its movement would follow a different logic, not emotional, not personal, procedural. She continued her routine. Morning at the diner, afternoon rest when possible, night at the office buildings, early hours at the motel. The sequence remained unchanged, even as the structure beneath it shifted. Greyson Cole, however, encountered the first visible disruption to his trajectory within days. The notification arrived through internal channels, not a public announcement, a formal request. Mandatory attendance at an ethics review meeting. The subject line was neutral. The content was not. Greyson read it once. Then again. The wording was precise. An internal inquiry regarding financial disclosures and potential conflicts of interest. Supporting documentation had been received. Attendance required. He did not respond immediately. Not because he did not understand. Because he did. The system he had adapted to now required him to operate within its constraints. Greyson's first instinct was to contain the situation. He contacted Ethan Caldwell directly. The number had been included in the demand letter. Ethan answered. "This is Greyson Cole," he said. "I'm aware," Ethan replied. There was no introduction beyond that. "This needs to be handled differently," Greyson said. "There's been a misunderstanding." Ethan did not respond immediately. "Then what specifically is being misunderstood?" he asked. Greyson paused. Not because he lacked an answer, because he needed to choose one. The nature of the support, he said. It wasn't structured. It wasn't an agreement. Ethan listened, then responded. "The documentation indicates otherwise." Greyson exhaled. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," he said. "This could have been resolved privately." Ethan's tone remained consistent. "Private resolution was offered," he said. "It was not accepted in a way that aligned with the documentation." Greyson recognized the framing. "You're involving the hospital," he said. "That's not appropriate." Ethan's response was immediate. "Your position within the hospital makes it relevant?" The statement settled between them. Greyson did not respond. Ethan continued. "If you have additional documentation that clarifies your position, you're welcome to submit it," he said. "Otherwise, the review will proceed based on the current record." Greyson ended the call shortly after, not because he had resolved anything, because he had reached the limit of what direct communication could achieve. The system had been engaged. And systems did not negotiate informally. Greyson spent the next several hours reviewing his own records. Bank statements, messages, emails. He searched for inconsistencies, for gaps, for anything that could challenge the structure Katherine had presented. What he found instead was alignment. The transfers were documented, the amounts clear, the timeline consistent, and the communications. He paused there, reading through messages he had sent years earlier. Language that had seemed temporary at the time, casual, unstructured. Now within this context, they carried different weight. Statements about repayment, acknowledgments of dependence, expressions of future obligation. They had not been intended as formal agreements, but they existed, and existence within a system was often enough. Greyson leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation settling into something more defined. This was no longer about perception alone. It was about record. The ethics review was scheduled for the following week. Attendance was mandatory. Greyson prepared, not emotionally, strategically. He reviewed the documentation again, this time with a different objective. Not to understand it, to position himself within it. He identified areas where language could be reframed, where intent could be clarified, where context could be emphasized. He constructed a narrative. Not false, but selective. Focused on the absence of formal agreement, on the voluntary nature of the support, on the lack of explicit contractual terms. He understood that within the system, framing mattered, not as much as evidence, but enough to influence interpretation. Madeline Foster became aware of the situation shortly after. Not through Greyson, through her father. The hospital board member had received notice of the review as part of his oversight responsibilities. He contacted Madeline directly. "This involves someone you've been working with," he said. Madeline listened. Her response was controlled. "What's the concern?" she asked. "Financial disclosures," he said. "Potential misrepresentation." Madeline did not react immediately. But she understood the implication. Greyson's position, his trajectory, the alignment they had been building. All of it now intersected with a process neither of them controlled. She contacted Greyson later that evening. He answered on the first ring. "You should have told me," she said. Greyson did not deny it. "I was handling it," he replied. Madeline paused. "Are you?" she asked. Greyson did not answer directly. "It's being reviewed," he said. Madeline's tone shifted slightly. Less personal, more analytical. "What's the documentation?" she asked. Greyson summarized. "Financial contributions, messages, audio." Madeline listened without interruption. When he finished, she asked a single question. "Can you dispute it?" Greyson considered. "Not entirely," he said. Madeline understood. Silence followed. "Then this affects more than you," she said. Greyson knew that. "Yes," he replied. Madeline did not elaborate. She did not need to. Their alignment had always been based on mutual advancement. If that advancement became uncertain, the alignment would adjust. That was the nature of it. Katherine Hale did not contact Greyson during this time. She did not need to. Her role within the process had shifted, from the participant to source. Ethan Caldwell kept her informed. "The review is scheduled," he said. "Yes," Katherine replied. "They've accepted the documentation as complete," he added. Katherine understood the significance. No gaps, no immediate challenges. "They may request clarification," Ethan continued. "Be available, but do not initiate." "I won't," Katherine said. The days leading up to the review passed without disruption to her routine. She worked. She documented. She maintained the structure that had brought the situation to this point. There was no anticipation, no attempt to predict the outcome. Katherine did not measure success in those terms. For her, the objective had already been achieved. The record existed. It had been submitted. It would be reviewed. Greyson Cole entered the hospital on the morning of the ethics meeting, with the same controlled posture he had maintained throughout his residency. But the structure around him had changed. Conversations paused slightly as he passed. Not visibly, but enough. Awareness had begun to circulate. Not in detail, but in presence. He reached the conference room 10 minutes early. The door was closed. A small sign indicated the meeting in progress. Greyson waited. For the first time since the process began, he experienced something unfamiliar, not fear, not uncertainty, constraint. The realization that the outcome would not be determined by his ability to control the narrative, but by the consistency of the record. Inside the room, the documentation was already being reviewed. Not interpreted emotionally, not influenced by intention, compared, aligned, measured. Katherine Hale's records had entered a system designed to evaluate precisely what she had built. And systems once engaged followed their own sequence. The meeting would begin. The statements would be heard. The evidence would be presented. And Greyson Cole would have to respond within a structure that did not adjust to perception, only to proof. The conference room did not announce its importance. There were no elevated seats, no formal stage, no visible hierarchy beyond placement at the table. The setting was neutral by design, controlled lighting, minimal decoration, a long table with evenly spaced chairs. A screen at one end. Documents arranged in identical folders. Structure without spectacle. Greyson Cole entered when he was called. Not before. He noted the individuals present as he took his seat. 3 members of the hospital's ethics committee. 1 administrative officer responsible for documentation. A legal advisor representing institutional interests. No audience, no observers. But the absence of visibility did not reduce the weight of the process. It concentrated it. Greyson sat upright, his posture aligned with the environment. Prepared, measured, controlled. The chair of the committee began without introduction. "This is a formal internal review regarding submitted documentation," she said. "You have been provided with a summary of the materials. Today we will examine the details and your responses." Greyson nodded. He did not speak. The administrative officer activated the screen. A timeline appeared. Structured, linear. Dates aligned with events. Financial entries marked in consistent intervals. Each point supported by documentation. Greyson recognized it immediately. Katherine's structure, presented in a format designed for evaluation. This timeline reflects financial contributions made over a 4-year period. The chair continued. "We will begin with verification." The first section focused on transfers, amounts, dates, frequency. The officer cross-referenced each entry with bank records. No discrepancies. Greyson confirmed when prompted. Yes, yes, yes. Each acknowledgement reinforced the structure. Not emotionally, factually. The next section shifted to communication. Selected messages appeared on the screen. Highlighted segments, context preserved. Greyson read them as they were displayed. He had written them. At the time, they had not been significant. Now they were. In these communications, the legal advisor said, "You reference repayment." Greyson maintained his posture. "Contextual," he replied. "Not contractual." The advisor noted the response. "Clarify," he said. Greyson adjusted his phrasing. "These statements were made during a different phase," he said. They reflected intent, not obligation. The chair considered the answer. "Intent can establish expectation," she said. Greyson did not respond. The officer moved to the next section. An audio file. Recorded communication, she stated. Relevant segment identified. The room remained silent as the recording played. Greyson's voice filled the space. Clear, uninterrupted. He spoke about reliance, about support, about future repayment, not as speculation, as acknowledgement. Greyson listened without interruption. His expression did not change, but the structure around him did. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was not empty. It was evaluative. The chair spoke. "Do you dispute the accuracy of this recording?" "No," Greyson said. "Do you dispute that it reflects your statements?" "No." The legal advisor leaned forward slightly. "Then your position is that these statements do not constitute an obligation." Greyson held his gaze. "Yes." The advisor made a note. The committee did not respond immediately. They allowed the structure to remain intact. Then the chair shifted the focus. "Beyond the financial and communicative elements," she said, "we are reviewing representation." Greyson understood the implication. "How you have presented your financial background and support within institutional contexts," she continued. The officer displayed another set of documents. Application materials, internal disclosures, professional summaries. Greyson recognized them. He had completed them carefully, strategically. Each section framed his progression, his achievements, his independence. There was no mention of external financial support. No reference to Katherine. The chair spoke again. "These materials indicate self-funded progression," she said. Greyson responded. "That was the understanding at the time." The legal advisor intervened. "Clarify understanding," he said. Greyson paused. Not long, but enough to register. "The support was informal," he said, "not structured in a way that required disclosure." The advisor did not challenge immediately. Instead, he referenced the timeline. "The contributions were consistent," he said. "Substantial. Sustained over multiple years." Greyson did not respond. The chair continued. "The question is not whether the support was formalized," she said. "It is whether its omission affects the accuracy of your representation." Greyson recognized the distinction. Accuracy, not intention. He adjusted. "My representation reflects my academic and professional performance," he said. The support did not alter that. The committee remained silent. The distinction was noted, but not accepted. The officer moved to the final section. A summary, not narrative, alignment. Financial contributions, communication, representation. Each element connected. Each connection supported by documentation. The structure was complete. The chair closed the file. "Do you have additional documentation to submit?" she asked. Greyson considered. He had reviewed his records. There was nothing that contradicted what had been presented. Only framing. "No," he said. "Do you wish to provide a statement?" she asked. Greyson understood the significance. This was the point where narrative could be introduced, where interpretation could be offered. He spoke carefully. "The support I received was not formalized," he said. "It was not defined as a loan. It was not structured as an agreement. My understanding was that it was voluntary." He paused, maintained his tone. "My progression has been based on my performance," he continued. "My qualifications are independent of that support." The statement was complete, structured, consistent with his position. The committee listened. Then the chair responded. "Your statement is noted," she said. There was no immediate conclusion, no indication of outcome. That was not how the process functioned. "This review will continue," she added. "You will be notified of further requirements." Greyson nodded. The meeting ended. He stood, collected his materials, exited the room. The corridor outside felt different. Not visibly, but structurally. Conversations resumed as he passed. But awareness had shifted. Not in detail, in presence. Greyson walked without hesitation, maintaining the posture he had established. But internally, the parameters had changed. He had presented his position. The system had received it. Now it would be measured. Katherine Hale did not attend the review. She did not need to. Her role had been completed before the meeting began. The documentation spoke. Ethan Caldwell contacted her later that day. "They've reviewed the initial materials," he said. Katherine listened. "Response?" she asked. "Consistent denial of formal obligation," Ethan replied. "No dispute of documentation." Katherine understood. "That's sufficient," she said. Ethan paused briefly. "They may request your presence for clarification," he added. Katherine considered. "If required," she said. "Be prepared," Ethan said. "I am," Katherine replied. The call ended. Katherine returned to her routine. There was no adjustment, no anticipation. The process had entered a phase where outcome was determined by alignment, not effort, not reaction. Alignment between record and evaluation. Greyson Cole had relied on perception, on presentation, on the ability to define his narrative. Katherine Hale had relied on structure, on documentation, on the consistency of recorded truth. The system now held both. And systems, unlike individuals, did not choose between narratives. They compared them. The hospital did not make announcements. It circulated awareness. Not through statements, but through adjustments, small procedural changes that signaled something had entered review. Schedules shifted. Supervisors requested additional documentation. Certain privileges were paused pending clarification. Greyson Cole noticed these changes before anyone spoke to him directly. His rotation in cardiology was reassigned. Temporarily, he was told, a standard adjustment during internal review. He acknowledged it without objection. Objection required a defined point of resistance. This process did not provide one. Instead, it redistributed him. Different department. Different supervising physician. Reduced exposure to the individuals whose opinions carried weight in placement decisions. The shift was subtle, but not insignificant. Madeline Foster noticed it as well. Not through official communication, through absence. Greyson was no longer present in the spaces where alignment had been forming. The small gatherings, the introductions, the informal discussions that shaped opportunity. She contacted him again. "Your schedule changed," she said. Greyson did not deny it. "Temporary," he replied. Madeline paused. "Temporary doesn't usually remove you from those rotations," she said. Greyson did not respond immediately. He understood the implication. "It's procedural," he said. Madeline considered that. "Procedural means recorded," she said. Greyson remained silent. Madeline adjusted her tone. Less direct, more strategic. "Can you resolve it quickly?" she asked. Greyson exhaled. "It's under review," he said. Madeline understood what that meant. Review did not operate on urgency. It operated on sequence. And the documentation she asked. Greyson summarized again. Financial contributions, messages, audio. Madeline listened. Her response was measured. "This connects to disclosure," she said. Not just personal history. Greyson knew that. "Yes." Madeline paused. "Then this affects more than your position," she said. The statement was not emotional. It was structural. Greyson understood. Alignment was conditional, not personal. Madeline did not need to say more. They ended the call without resolution. Katherine Hale continued her routine without interruption. She had received no direct communication from the hospital. That was expected. Her involvement existed through documentation, not presence. Ethan Caldwell remained her point of contact. "They've moved to secondary review," he said. Katherine listened. "Clarification phase," he added. "They're aligning your documentation with institutional disclosures." Katherine understood the process. "They may request a statement," Ethan continued. "I'm available," Katherine said. Ethan paused. "There's another element," he added. "They're examining representation within application materials." Katherine did not react, but she registered the expansion. "Alignment," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied. The call ended. Katherine did not revisit the documents. She did not need to. The structure had been built to withstand review. Now it was being tested. Greyson's second meeting with the ethics committee was scheduled 3 days later. This time, the structure of the room remained the same. But the focus shifted. From verification to implication. He entered as before, controlled, measured. But the context had changed. The chair began without delay. "We are continuing the review," she said. "This phase addresses representation and alignment with institutional standards." Greyson nodded. The officer displayed a comparative structure. On one side, his application materials. On the other, Katherine's financial records. Aligned by date, parallel, consistent. "This review examines whether omission of external financial support constitutes misrepresentation," the chair said. Greyson maintained his posture. My understanding was that the support did not require disclosure, he said. The legal advisor responded. Your understanding is noted, he said. The question is whether that understanding aligns with institutional expectations. Greyson did not respond immediately. He adjusted his phrasing. The support was not formalized, he said. There was no agreement that defined it as a loan or obligation. The advisor referenced the communication records. Your statements indicate expectation of repayment, he said. Greyson remained consistent. Contextual, he replied. The chair observed. Context does not negate consistency, she said. The statement remained in the room, unchallenged. The officer moved to another section. Professional summaries. Internal evaluations. Greyson's performance was strong, consistently above average. Positive feedback. No indication of deficiency. The chair acknowledged it. Your performance is not in question, she said. Greyson understood the distinction. This was not about competence. It was about structure. Then what is being evaluated, he asked. The legal advisor answered. Integrity of representation, he said. Greyson held his gaze. My performance reflects my capability, he said. The advisor did not dispute that. This review does not challenge your capability, he said. It examines whether the context of that capability has been accurately presented. Greyson recognized the framing. He adjusted again. The support did not alter my performance, he said. The chair responded. That is not the sole consideration, she said. Silence followed, not empty, evaluative. The officer displayed the audio transcript. Highlighted sections, Greyson's voice converted into text. Structured, permanent. Future repayment, the chair read. Dependents acknowledged, the advisor added. Greyson did not dispute. He maintained his position. Statements made under different conditions, he said. The chair considered. Conditions do not remove content, she said. The statement remained. Greyson understood that further argument would not shift the structure. The process was not adversarial. It was comparative. Documentation against representation. The officer closed the file. The chair spoke. This review will proceed to determination, she said. You will be notified of the outcome. Greyson nodded. The meeting ended. He exited the room again. But this time, the shift was more defined. Not in visibility, in structure. His position now existed within a pending decision, not an ongoing review. A conclusion approaching. Madeline Foster received the update through her father. Determination phase, he said. Madeline understood. That meant the structure was complete. The system had enough. And his position, she asked. Dependent on outcome, he replied. Madeline paused, then asked, Is there mitigation? Her father considered. Limited, he said. Documentation is consistent. Madeline did not respond immediately, then understood. The call ended. Katherine Hale received a message from Ethan Caldwell that evening. They've moved to determination, he said. Katherine read it once. Timeline, she asked. Short, Ethan replied. Days, not weeks, Katherine acknowledged. There was nothing more to add, nothing more to adjust. The process had reached its final stage. Greyson Cole had built his trajectory on precision, on control, on alignment with the right structures. Katherine Hale had built her response the same way, not through reaction, through record. Now both structures existed within a system that evaluated without preference. Only comparison, only consistency, only truth as it could be documented. The outcome would not be immediate, but it would be final within the context that mattered. And Katherine did not need to anticipate it. Because the record had already determined its direction, the determination did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded in stages, each one measured, documented, and communicated through channels that avoided spectacle. The hospital did not announce outcomes. It issued decisions. Greyson Cole received the first notification early in the morning. A message from administration. Subject review outcome. Preliminary determination. He read it once, then again. The language was precise. The committee had concluded that the financial support he received constituted a sustained and material contribution that should have been disclosed within institutional documentation. The omission, when evaluated alongside his own recorded statements, created a discrepancy between representation and documented reality. No accusation of fraud, no claim of fabrication, but a clear statement. The record did not align with the presentation. Greyson remained seated as he finished reading. The room around him, his apartment, his notes, the structure he had built to support his progression, did not change. But its stability did. The message continued, pending final administrative review. The following actions would be enacted: temporary suspension from certain rotations, removal from consideration for advanced placement recommendations, mandatory disclosure correction within all institutional records, further review to determine additional consequences. Greyson closed the message. Not abruptly, deliberately. He placed his phone on the table and remained still for several seconds. Not reacting, recalculating. The structure he had relied on, performance perception alignment, had shifted. Not completely, but enough. He contacted Madeline. She answered after the second ring. What happened, she asked. Greyson summarized. Not the language, the structure. Misalignment, he said. Disclosure issue. Madeline listened. Her response was immediate. That affects placement, she said. Yes. A pause. Then, and recommendations. Yes. Madeline did not continue immediately. Greyson could hear her processing. Not emotionally, structurally. What's next, she asked. Final review, he said. Madeline exhaled. That limits options, she said. Greyson understood. Options had been central to his trajectory. Now they were constrained. We can still adjust, he said. Madeline did not respond immediately. Then adjustment depends on stability, she said. Greyson recognized the shift in her tone. Subtle, but present. Are you stable, she asked. The question was not personal. It was evaluative. Greyson did not answer directly. It's being resolved, he said. Madeline allowed a brief pause. Then let me know when it is, she said. The call ended. Katherine Hale did not receive the notification. She did not need to. Ethan Caldwell contacted her later that day. They've issued a preliminary determination, he said. Katherine listened. Outcome aligns with documentation, he added. Katherine understood. Next step, she asked. Administrative confirmation, Ethan said. Then enforcement. Katherine nodded, though he could not see it. Understood, she said. Ethan paused. They may request a formal statement from you, he added, not for verification, for completeness. Katherine considered. If required, she said. Ethan acknowledged. I'll keep you informed. The call ended. Katherine returned to her routine. There was no change, no adjustment. The process had reached a point where her involvement was no longer active. It existed within the system. Greyson's second notification arrived 2 days later. Final determination. The language was consistent with the preliminary review. But now, it was fixed. The committee had concluded that the omission of sustained financial support, combined with documented acknowledgement of that support, constituted a violation of institutional ethical standards related to representation and disclosure. Consequences were outlined. Formal disciplinary record within the institution, extended suspension from high-level rotations, removal from competitive placement tracks, requirement to complete an ethics remediation program, mandatory correction of all submitted materials. Greyson read the document in full. Then again, the structure was clear, not punitive in appearance, but limiting in effect. His trajectory had not been erased, but it had been altered, significantly. He did not contact Ethan Caldwell. There was no basis for dispute. The documentation was consistent. His statements aligned with it. The system had compared both and determined outcome. Greyson sat in the silence of his apartment, the weight of the decision settling not as shock, but as structure. This was not something that could be argued. It had already been measured. Madeline contacted him that evening. He answered. "They finalized it?" she asked. "Yes." "What's the impact?" she continued. Greyson summarized. Again, not the language, the structure. Madeline listened. Her response was controlled. "That changes placement," she said. "Yes." Another pause. "Longer this time." "And timeline," she added. "Yes." Greyson waited. Madeline did not speak immediately. "Then I need to consider how this affects things," she said. Greyson understood. "Of course," he replied. There was no argument, no attempt to negotiate, because the alignment had always been conditional. Madeline ended the call without further discussion. Katherine Hale received the final update from Ethan Caldwell the following morning. "It's complete," he said. Katherine listened. "Determination aligns with submission," he added. Katherine understood. "Thank you," she said. Ethan paused. "There is a civil component we can still pursue," he said. "Recovery of funds." Katherine considered. "Not the amount, the structure." "It's not necessary," she said. Ethan did not respond immediately. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes." The answer was precise, not dismissive, deliberate. Ethan acknowledged, understood. The call ended. Katherine placed her phone down and returned to her notebook. She opened to the final page. Date, outcome, institutional determination, alignment confirmed. She did not write more. There was no need. The record was complete, not just in content, in conclusion. Greyson Cole had built his progression on precision, on control, on the ability to define how he was perceived. Katherine Hale had built her response the same way. Through observation, through documentation, through structure. The system had compared both and determined which one held. There was no confrontation, no public exposure, no reversal performed in front of an audience. Only alignment between what had happened and what had been presented. Katherine closed the notebook and placed it back in her bag. She did not revisit the earlier pages. She did not reflect on the process. Reflection, she knew, often introduced interpretation. What mattered had already been established. She stood, prepared for her next shift. The diner, the office buildings, the motel. Her life did not change because the outcome had been confirmed. It had already changed when she began to record. Greyson Cole remained within the system. But now the system contained a record that could not be removed. Not entirely, not completely. It would follow him, not visibly, but structurally. Katherine Hale did not need to carry it. She had already placed it where it would remain. The final meeting was not requested by Katherine Hale. It was scheduled by the hospital, not as a hearing, as a formality, a closing procedure. Greyson Cole received the notice without surprise. Attendance required, review summary to be acknowledged, documentation to be signed. No debate, no appeal within that room, only confirmation. The setting was smaller than before, a private conference space adjacent to the administrative offices. No extended committee. Only 2 representatives, one from the ethics board, one from administration, and a legal observer. Katherine's name appeared in the notice. Optional attendance. Not required, Ethan Caldwell informed her. They've offered you the opportunity to attend, he said. Katherine considered. What function would it serve, she asked. Presence, Ethan replied. Final alignment. It's not necessary. Katherine understood. She did not need to be there for the outcome to exist. But presence had its own structure. I'll attend, she said. Ethan acknowledged. Then we'll be there. The meeting was scheduled for late morning. Katherine arrived on time. She wore the same kind of clothing she always chose, neutral, functional, without emphasis. No attempt to adjust her appearance to the setting. No attempt to match the formality of the institution. She did not need to. Her role was not to present. It was to observe. Greyson arrived shortly after. He saw her immediately. There was no visible reaction, but the recognition was clear. Not surprise, not discomfort, acknowledgement. He had anticipated this possibility. They did not speak. There was no reason to. The meeting began as soon as all parties were seated. The administrative representative opened the file. This is a formal confirmation of the ethics review outcome, she said. All findings have been documented and communicated. Today's purpose is acknowledgement and procedural closure. Greyson nodded. Katherine remained still. The representative summarized the determination, not in detail, in structure. Sustained financial support, documented acknowledgement, omission within institutional representation, misalignment confirmed, corrective actions outlined. The language was consistent with the written determination. No additions, no emphasis, only clarity. Greyson listened. His posture remained unchanged, controlled, measured. The representative continued. You are required to sign acknowledgement of this determination, she said. This does not indicate agreement. It confirms receipt and understanding. Greyson reached for the document, paused briefly, then signed. The motion was deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant, Katherine observed. Not the act, the structure of it, completion. The legal observer noted the signature. The document was filed. The representative turned to Katherine. You have the option to provide a final statement for the record, she said. Katherine considered. Not for long. Then no, she said. The representative nodded, understood. There was no expectation, no pressure. Katherine's role had never required a statement. Her documentation had already fulfilled that function. The meeting moved to its final stage. Administrative procedures will proceed as outlined, the representative said. This concludes the review process. There was no closing remark, no summary beyond what had already been stated. The system did not require narrative. It required completion. The meeting ended. Greyson stood, collected his materials. He did not leave immediately. For a brief moment, he remained where he was. Then he turned toward Katherine, not to speak, but to acknowledge. A small movement, subtle but intentional. Katherine met his gaze. There was no expression in it. No accusation, no resolution, only recognition. Then she looked away. Greyson left the room. The door closed behind him without sound. Katherine remained seated for a moment longer, not reflecting, not processing, allowing the structure to settle into finality. Ethan Caldwell placed a hand on the folder in front of him. It's done, he said. Katherine nodded. Yes. Ethan paused. There's nothing further required, he added. Katherine understood. Her role had concluded. She stood, collected her bag, left the room the same way she had entered. Quietly. Outside, the hospital continued its routine. Staff moved through corridors. Conversations resumed. Nothing in the environment indicated that a process had just concluded. That was how systems functioned. They absorbed events, then continued. Katherine walked to her car. The same path she had taken before, the same pace. No change in movement, no visible shift. Inside, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. Not because she needed to think, because she allowed space between completion and continuation. Then she reached into her bag, removed her notebook, opened to the final page. She added one line. Process closed, record confirmed. She closed the notebook, placed it back in her bag, started the car. Greyson Cole returned to his apartment. The signed document remained in his bag. He did not review it. He did not need to. He understood its content, its implications. The structure of his trajectory had changed, not erased, but redirected. Opportunities that had once been accessible would now require different paths, different timing, different positioning. He sat down. For the first time since the process began, there was no next step to calculate, no adjustment to make immediately, only the recognition of what had been fixed. His phone remained silent. Madeline had not contacted him. He did not reach out, because he understood. Alignment had shifted. And in systems built on alignment, shifts were rarely reversed. Katherine Hale drove back toward the city, the diner, the office buildings, the motel. Her routine remained, but its purpose had changed. Not externally, internally. She no longer documented. She no longer needed to. The record existed where it needed to exist. She had transferred it, completed it, closed it. The process had not required confrontation. It had not required visibility. It had not required reversal in a public space. Only consistency, only structure, only truth documented and aligned. Katherine did not look back. There was nothing behind her that required it. Everything that had needed to be carried had already been placed. And it would remain, not with her, but within the system that had received it. The days after the final meeting did not arrive with resolution. They arrived with continuity. Katherine Hale returned to her routine without interruption. The diner opened at the same hour. The office buildings required the same maintenance. The motel desk remained quiet between midnight and dawn. Nothing in her external life reflected what had been concluded inside the hospital. That was expected. Katherine had never built her actions around visible outcomes. She built them around structure. And the structure had reached completion. For the first time in years, she did not open her notebook at the end of each day. The habit remained. The need did not. The pages that once held entries, dates, amounts, observations remained untouched. Not abandoned, preserved. A record that no longer required continuation. She did not close the notebook permanently. She simply stopped adding to it. Greyson Cole continued within the system that had evaluated him. His schedule resumed, but not in its previous form. Rotations were assigned with different parameters. Access to certain departments remained limited. The path that had once appeared direct now required adjustment. He adapted. He had always adapted. But the conditions had changed. Where alignment had once been assumed, it now required demonstration. Where perception had once been shaped by momentum, it now carried context. Conversations with supervisors were measured. Evaluations included references not only to performance, but to adherence, to awareness, to understanding of professional responsibility. The language was neutral, but its presence was consistent. Greyson did not challenge it. There was nothing to challenge. The documentation existed. The determination had been made. The system had incorporated it. Madeline Foster's absence was not immediate. It unfolded gradually. Fewer messages, longer intervals, conversations that shifted from forward planning to general updates. Then, eventually, silence. There was no formal ending, No statement, no confrontation. Alignment had changed. And within that structure, change did not require explanation. Greyson recognized it without needing it to be defined. He did not attempt to reestablish it. He understood the conditions that had formed it, and the conditions that had altered it. Katherine did not follow any of this directly. She did not monitor. She did not search. Her involvement had concluded when the record had been transferred. Everything that followed existed within a system she no longer needed to observe. One evening at the end of her shift at the diner, Katherine received a message. From Ethan Caldwell. Final documentation archived, it read. No further action required. Katherine read it once, then replied, understood. There was no follow-up, no additional detail. The process from a legal perspective was complete. Katherine placed her phone down and finished closing the diner for the night. The motions were familiar. Wiping down counters, balancing the register, turning off lights in sequence. She moved through each step without deviation. Outside, the air carried the early signs of a seasonal shift. Not cold, not warm. Transition. Katherine stood for a moment before walking to her car, not reflecting, just observing. The space around her, the absence of urgency, the absence of calculation. For years, every action had been connected to a structure she maintained. Now that structure existed independently. She did not need to hold it. She drove home, entered her apartment, placed her bag on the table, removed the notebook. She opened it, not to review, to confirm. The final page remained as she had left it. Process closed. Record confirmed. Katherine looked at the words briefly, then closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf, not hidden, not emphasized, stored. The next morning, she woke at the same hour, prepared for the same routine. But there was a difference. Not in schedule, in allocation. The hours that had once been directed toward support were now unassigned, not empty, available. Katherine considered that. Not in terms of opportunity, in terms of structure. She opened her laptop, not to review past records, to create a new file. Blank, no title, no predefined categories, just space. She began listing her current resources. Income, time, capacity, the same method she had always used. But now, the variables were different. Not constrained by obligation, not directed outward. She did not define the outcome immediately. She did not need to. Structure, she knew, revealed direction over time. Greyson Cole continued forward. His path altered, not stopped. He would complete his residency. He would continue within the profession. But the trajectory would carry context, documentation that existed within institutional records. Not visible to everyone, but present where it mattered. Katherine Hale did not consider this as consequence. She did not measure his outcome against her actions. She did not evaluate, because evaluation implied investment. And her investment had already been concluded. She did not speak about the process, not to coworkers, not to acquaintances. There was no narrative she needed to share. The record existed where it needed to exist. That was sufficient. Weeks passed, then months. Katherine's routine adjusted gradually. One job reduced, then another. Not abruptly, strategically. She did not replace them immediately. She allowed the structure to stabilize before introducing change. One afternoon, she sat at a table in the diner during a break. Not working, just present. The space looked the same as it had years before. The same counter, the same light, the same predictable rhythm. But her position within it had shifted. She was no longer building towards something defined by another person's trajectory. She was building something unassigned, undefined, And for the first time, that lack of definition did not require immediate resolution. It allowed for precision. Katherine did not rush to fill it. She let it remain open, because she understood something she had learned through years of structure. Clarity does not come from reaction. It comes from consistency. The same consistency that had allowed her to document every transfer, every message, every shift in behavior. Now that consistency would apply to something else, something not yet defined. Greyson Cole would continue. Katherine Hale would continue. Their paths would not intersect again. Not because they could not, because there was no structure that required it. Katherine closed her laptop and returned to work. Not because she needed to, because she chose to. And that distinction, small, precise, controlled, was the only outcome that mattered. In the end, nothing unfolded loudly. There was no public reckoning, no moment designed for applause or outrage. No words spoken that needed to be remembered. Only records that remained quietly in the places built to hold them. Katherine Hale never raised her voice. She never asked for recognition, never demanded an apology, never positioned herself for revenge. She did something far more enduring. She paid attention. She documented. She allowed truth to exist in a form that could not be rewritten. And when the time came, she placed that truth where it could be measured without bias. Not by emotion, not by memory, but by consistency. Greyson Cole did not lose everything. He lost something more precise, the version of his story that excluded what had made it possible. And in that loss, the system did not punish him. It corrected the record. Katherine did not stay to witness what followed. She did not need to, because her outcome was never tied to his. It was tied to something quieter, the ability to walk away without carrying what had already been placed where it belonged. If you've ever given more than was acknowledged, if you've ever watched someone move forward as if your presence was never part of their path, then you already understand this story. Wherever you are, and whatever time it is for you right now, leave a comment. I read everyone. I read every. And if stories like this resonate with you, quiet strength, truth, without noise, consider staying.